bodies of water and why it's so important to talk about bodies of water. Just like mountains are so large that they have a massive impact on biome development, so do bodies of water, such as rivers and lakes, right? The rivers and lakes can impact. And a water that's on land is in the whole area, that's referred to as what's called a watershed. So if I had a river that went from a mountain range that went all the way over to this coastline right here, this entire area right here would be called a watershed. Okay? And you're going to have a lot of watershed on your maps, maybe except for places like a wasteland or a desert, some place where it might be arid. Okay? Let's talk a little bit next about how exactly rivers are shaped and where to kind of put them. So for starters, a river is always going to start in the mountains where both rainfall and snowmelt accumulate in what's called the headwaters. It's generally a lake that's high up in the mountains. That water then goes down the mountain, it goes downhill, and it makes its way towards the ocean. Now, there are multiple ways that you can go about doing your rivers. You can use a line tool with a stamp or a color, or you can also use the subtract mode of the mask tool. Now, when you need to decide which is the best tool to use for making a river, that would depend on a couple things. For instance, if I have mask effects on, so let me turn on my mask effects. You'll notice that I have these mask effects on, and these are very helpful in creating some transition between the ocean and the land itself, right? With those ripples around it and stuff like that. Okay. All right. So let's try one method using the subtract mode of the mask tool. I'm going to bring the brush size all the way to down, and then you're going to see what I mean by deciding, oopsie, my bad, go to circle. I use the edgy brush there. Watch what happens when I go ahead and, oopsie, I'm starting at the ocean. Let's start at the mountains first. So a river starts in the mountains, and then it meanders its way downhill to the ocean. Now see what happens with the mask effects? When I do that, that river kind of, it's so small that it uses the stroke, and you can't really see the color that the ocean is behind it. Now, there are a couple approaches to this. You could bring the stroke size down a little bit if you wanted to. That would kind of allow you to see more of the river itself. So you can always bring the stroke size down. That'll be helpful. Or if you don't mind the river being that darker, browner color, that's okay, because again, this is a parchment map. And when it comes to Parchment World, you don't have to have specifically the color range that you would have with like a Fantasy World map, where you might want to have the river be a bluish color. With a parchment map, you have a little bit more artistic freedom because it's a parchment map, right? And a lot of people kind of choose parchment maps for that reason. They're not quite as colorful, and there's not quite as much texturing involved and texture blending because it's a parchment map. That's why parchment maps are so popular. They're a little bit easier, and they have that old-timey kind of look. All right, so that's one way that you can create a river, right, with the subtract mode of the mask tool. I do want to mention something about scale when it comes to rivers, and I mentioned this in previous episodes, is that rivers at a particular scale, especially a world scale, you likely wouldn't even be able to see the river at all. This is where you kind of get that paradox of scale. You probably would never even see it on a map when you're trying to make a world map scale. So this is one of those things where you jump into this paradox. Well, wait a minute, I'm going to make a river, but its scale will probably be bigger. It's going to be showing up on the map. So there's one thing you have to factor. The other one is where exactly you want to have the scale, or what exactly you want the scale to be. So for instance, when it comes to the meanders, if you wanted to show that the world was much larger and stuff, then you would want to have the meanders be a little bit smaller, right? Because when you're zoomed in, the meanders are going to be big, right? Because you're zoomed in. But when you want to show a sense of distance, then your meanders are going to be much, much smaller because it's at a smaller scale, right? So if I wanted to have my meanders, I wouldn't have these large sweeping meanders because that doesn't fit well with the scale that I'm trying to work with. So this is one of those difficult kind of conundrums that you kind of have to work with. All right. So both look good to me, whether you have a larger meander or a smaller one. What I don't recommend is what I did here, these very large sweeping meanders. That's more like a fantasy regional map, right? So if you wanted to go with something more realistic, then you would probably go with something a little bit more like this. You notice that the meanders are tiny, absolutely tiny, and you want a little bit of jitter in your movement when you're making the map, so that way you can show these tiny meanders, all right? Or you can go with not so realistic by just making the meanders more obvious. And this is an artistic decision that you, as the cartographer, have to make for yourself, right? My suggestion is if you have a ton of rivers on your map, perhaps don't have them all have these big windy meanders, because they'll bump into each other, right? If you only have just a couple maps or a couple rivers on your map, then I think it's okay to go with the slightly larger meanders. That's a decision that you have to make. So I'm going to go ahead and undo all these changes here. I don't want to have that here. I'll go ahead and remove a couple of these, and we'll kind of pick a river that I want to keep. So we'll go ahead and remove it. Restore. Okay. All right. So now when it comes to where to place your rivers, this one is not too complex. It just depends on if you have some biomes in mind. Perhaps in your lore, you already got an idea that you want to have like a river folk, right? And you want to have it in a certain, you already know where you kind of want that location to be. Then that's where you're probably going to want to put some rivers, right? You want to create like a river folk collective like we did in our fantasy world style. Or if you want to have, meanders do make more sense on a level terrain, by the way. I absolutely agree with that, Awesome Possum. That's absolutely true. But for scale purposes, you can change it up. Okay, so, I mean, there isn't really a system that I have developed for myself on where to put rivers outside of just knowing the certain kind of list of biomes that I have. I generally have like some kind of river biome, whether it's a river delta, whatever it might be. And I will zoom out and I'll just take place about where I want to have my rivers. And for me personally, I want to have a couple on here, at least 6 or 7 major rivers, so that way they're there. And I'm going to create maybe 4 or 5 on this continent, maybe 3 or 4 on this one, and a couple on this one. Hey, first time chatter. Glad that you're here, by the way. Hi. Awesome. Love it. New people. Let's go with the subtract mode of the mask tool. I'm perfectly fine with the rivers being that brown color because the scale, because you're using a parchment map and it doesn't really matter. So let's start with the first one. Let's go ahead and create a river that goes this way. And again, I'm going to make the meander small. And just like Awesome Possum said, if you wanted to show more flat, let's say that this part right here is flatter, then I'll make some more interesting meanders closer to the river. So as you're going up, as the river is closer to the mountains, the meanders are smaller. And then the further I get away from it, where it starts to flatten out and go towards the ocean, I'll have my meanders stick out more. Thanks, by the way, Awesome Possum, for that information. Absolutely love that. Love it when people in the chat actually share their knowledge, because I'm an armchair geographer. So when it comes to this stuff, I'm not an expert, but I love it when people share what knowledge they have as well. So feel free to share whatever you want in the chat. So I've got one river here. Let's go ahead and create another one right here. And what I'll do is I'll have it be a mountain lake that's at the base of the mountain, like this. And I'm going to have it to where I can see the mountain peak in front of it, so that this way it is overlapping. Overlapping is a great way to create depth. So next I'll create a river that kind of goes away from the lake and then moves its way towards the ocean like that. Let's go ahead and create a couple more. Let's put one that goes, maybe follows through this valley right here. So let's put one right here. And it kind of meanders through the valley like this. Let's do that overlap like we did before. And then we'll kind of have it do these larger meanders as it's in this flatter valley space. And then we'll have it go out to the ocean. Let's go ahead and create a couple more. Let's have one go this way. Let's go show some elevation here. So I'll make some smaller meanders to show elevation, and then it flattens out and then goes towards the ocean. So not difficult making rivers, right? Let's go ahead and make a couple more on this continent, and we'll finish the rest of them. Let's also have one be behind this mountain here as it goes out towards the ocean. And then we'll also add in some tributaries as well, because what happens often is that multiple headwaters will flow towards the ocean, and then they'll connect. So if I want, I can create another one that goes like this and then connects into here, right? Same thing here. Maybe I want another one that connects right here and then connects into there, right? Another one connects right here. And then what you can do is every time that you have a river that connects into it, it should get a little bit wider, right? Because another water source is feeding it. So it makes sense to go in and to make this section just a little bit wider, right? Because we've increased the amount of water that the river takes. So same thing here. I'll make this a little bit wider because now I've added in that piece. So whenever you add in multiple water sources, start to make the berth or the width of the river wider. Okay, let's keep going here. Let's put one there. Let's also put another one that goes over here. Actually, let's not put it side by side. One thing that I try not to do is I try not to have another river that's adjacent to the river on the other side. And what that kind of does, unfortunately, is it kind of looks like the river is just going through the mountains and then going to the other side. And so I try to avoid this when possible. So instead, I'll make sure that the river is like over here somewhere. And that way it doesn't kind of meander that way. And what I can also do is I can create a series of lakes. Now this is more in the fantasy element where rivers and lakes kind of create this network system. So I'll go ahead and create it here. And then I'm going to create a series of lakes. So we'll put another one like right here that connects like this. Oopsie, make sure I get all those parts connected here. And let's also put another one that kind of connects here. Another one that kind of connects here, and then we'll create some tributaries that kind of branch off but don't really go anywhere. Now, when it comes to rivers splitting, rivers can split. It's called river bifurcation, but it is indeed rare. It doesn't happen a whole lot in reality. But in your fantasy map, you can have as much river bifurcation as you want. In fact, your rivers don't have to be realistic at all. That's the point of fantasy, right? And in fact, a lake or a river that doesn't follow reality is going to pop out more than a river or a lake that isn't. And therefore, you're going to create that contrast. So when you do that, when you create an unrealistic element, it clashes. And then therefore, it contrasts and it sticks out. So it's always nice to put in some unrealistic elements like unrealistic rivers, unrealistic lakes, things like that. Helps to make it pop out more. So kind of an important thing to think about when you're adding in your elements. So let's just keep adding more. Let's take a step back. Whenever I add in several things, I always try to take a step back and kind of gauge what I've been doing. Yeah, absolutely, Cheryl. Rivers can be split by beaver dams, large boulders, glacial deposits, and human interaction. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So kind of nice. Let's also make a, I think it's, I'm trying to remember the name of it. I think it's called an oxbow lake. If you're not sure with what an oxbow lake is. First, let's make a river. And then I'll make an oxbow lake. So let's have a river start here. Oopsie, that is the wrong tool. Subtract mode, there we go. Let's go ahead and create our river. Now an oxbow lake, if you're not familiar with what an oxbow lake is where a river dried up and one of the meanders didn't dry up. In other words, what I can do is I can take this meander right here and create this oxbow lake like this. So here's the oxbow lake. And then I can go back into the add mode and then just cover this up right here. And now you have what's called an oxbow lake. It just means that the river dried up and it left this lake called an oxbow because it's meant to look like the bow for an ox that goes on the back, right? So that's basically an oxbow lake. I'll go ahead and save it. I know I'm only at 43 changes, but it's always nice to save it. And then we'll continue adding more rivers, lakes. And then I think if there's time left over, we can go in to start establishing some biome locations. So, because we're only about 30 minutes in, it might take the rest of the stream to actually add the rivers and lakes, but let's just keep adding and keep going. All right, let's go in here. Let's go ahead and add some really nice locations to put lakes are at the base of mountains, right? Remember I put one right here. Let's go ahead and put another one right here. Oopsie, subtract. And I'm going to use this sense of overlap, right? I'm building it behind the mountain range so that it creates this sense of depth, right? It looks nice when you have this, this depth here. That always looks nicer. So let's put that there. And then let's also put in a couple more lakes. Yes, thank you. I was mistaken about the Oxbow Lake. Doesn't necessarily mean they dry up. They just redirect in a different direction. My mistake. Thank you, by the way, Sheriff, for catching that. As I mentioned, not an armchair. Armchair, guys, so I don't always know. Okay, let's go ahead and create another river right here. We're just going to keep creating as many rivers as need be. Let's go ahead and put a lake over here. And we'll kind of connect it to this one. I want to have like a series of like connected rivers and lakes. I think that will make it more interesting. Go ahead and create a couple more meanders here. Let's put another one that goes off right here like this. And then let's create some smaller bodies of water like this. There we go. And then let me just go ahead and take a step back and just kind of look at it to see how it looks. Yep. All right, cool. That looks good. This will be a nice verdant area, right? With all this water right here, I can make a nice green forest here or a plain. That would be nice there. Okay, let's keep adding. We'll add in about a dozen more or so. Let's go ahead and put it here. We'll have it meander down. This part right here is flatter, so we'll have the larger meanders. Let's create a river delta. All right, so with the river delta, when you're doing your river deltas, or if you're just doing tributaries, when you're branching them off, put them off in a little corner like this. That will kind of keep this continuity of flow. All right, so whenever you're adding your tributaries, that's where you would add them. Just like we did with the mountains, there were these joints where the mountains are. It's the same concept here, right? And so I'm going to create a river delta. So that means I'm going to have a series of branches kind of going out towards the river, like going out towards the ocean like this. Let's put another one right here. I think that looks good. There we go. Let's add in, let's go ahead and remove that. I actually don't like that there. This is going to create our river delta. What a river delta is basically caused by there's not enough flow of the water at the mouth to push all the sediment over into the ocean, to push it over. And so that sediment builds up over time, and then it creates these like little islands off your coast, little mounds of dirt or pebbles or rock. And that's what's referred to as a river delta. Great location for adding like stilt houses, a stilt village, or whatever. Nice place to have it. Also great for battle maps as well. Okay, let's take a step back and look at it and just keep going. I think we can add, I think this right here looks good. Let's go ahead and add some here as well. Just where that lake is, I like that. So let's go ahead and put one coming from that lake and then kind of making its way towards the ocean here. Let's go ahead and have a couple going this way. These are much smaller rivers going here. Let's also have it kind of branch off here a little bit. Let's have this one branch, this one. There we go. And then we can add a small one that goes here. It looks good. Let's also add in a couple more lakes. Let's put in a lake right here. All right, looks good. Oops, let's go ahead and get those spots. There we go. Let's go down here. Let's just put one river, one lake and one river, one right here. Again, we're going to overlap. Okay, and then we can have a little river that goes towards the ocean here. There we go. Let's go do this one as well. Make a couple. Let's make a little lake right here, and then we'll have it go towards the ocean. Now, I'm using a pen, but you can also use a mouse, and I feel that a mouse works fine. Let me go ahead and show you what it looks like when I use the mouse. And you know what's nice is there is going to be some jitter when using the mouse, and honestly, I kind of like that jitter because it's going to show those small meanders. So just so you know, it's not too difficult to do it with a mouse, though a pen is very, very helpful. I will say, if you are going to get a pen, I would totally recommend it. They work really, really well. So let's go ahead and add another one that goes this way. To here, let's add a little mountain lake. Maybe right here, just kind of hard to see it. And then we'll add a couple lakes, actually. Let's make some really big lakes. These are going to be quite massive if we're using the 250 square miles logic here. These are really, really large bodies of water. Okay, let's add in a couple more here. And let's also maybe connect it into this river here. There we go. All right, we'll add a couple tributaries. There we go. That looks good. I like that. Let's go up here. All right, last island or last landmass right here. We'll go ahead and add our rivers. Let's go ahead and put in a nice lake right here. I think that looks good. Let's go ahead and bend it a little bit, make it a little bit more unique in shape. There we go. Okay, and then we'll have a river that kind of goes through the valley here, just like we did with that other one. And then we'll have it go all the way. The original map was not randomly generated, actually. I used a plate tectonic method. You can go ahead and check out part 1 if you want to figure out how to do that, okay? I'm going to have to make some changes to some things here, but I think that river looks good. Let's just keep going. Let's add in a couple more lakes. Let's add in a big, massive lake right here. It's kind of a nice shape here. And then it's just so big, I think I'll increase the brush size so that way I can fill it in quicker. It's a bit of a big lake right there. Massive, massive lake. Very, very big. There we go. Okay, subtract, go back to 1. And then let's have a river system here. And you know what we could do is we're going to have it, oopsie, subtract. What we'll do is we'll actually have it to where the water of this lake never actually makes it to the ocean. So what we'll do is we'll create a series of river systems that kind of go here. And what we'll do is we're going to add a fantasy element to this. We're going to make this unrealistic by creating a series of like channels that never make it to the ocean. Kind of this more fantastical kind of look to it, but it should look more interesting that way. So I'll add in a couple little lakes here. Add a bigger one here, a little one here. Oh, you are most welcome, by the way. Imp, first time chatter, glad that you're here, by the way. And then let's go ahead and create some bodies of water that connect to these as well. Completely unrealistic, doesn't follow reality in the slightest bit, but as you can see, unlike all the other shapes that you see here, it really, really pops out, right? When you start breaking rules and start making things more interesting, you start to have things more interesting. You kind of make it more fantastical, right? That could be some kind of watershed. It could be a swamp. It could be whatever. So, because this is, if you want to follow the logic of the scale that we have here, this is this is about 1,000 miles right here. It's quite a bit. This is about 1,000 miles of wetland right here. So, as you can see, you're following this kind of logic. But I think that it's okay to do that. When it comes to fantasy, there is no too big or too small, right? That is the beauty of fantasy, is that you don't have to follow by these rules. The rules are meant to be broken with a fantasy map. That's just the way it is. Okay, let's go ahead and continue adding some more rivers, and then we'll go ahead, continue adding lakes as well. Let's put one there. Let's go and put another lake right here behind. I think that looks good. And then a river that leads to it. When in doubt, blame a glacier. Ridiculous large. Absolutely, Jonathan. Yep, I honestly just kind of feel like, this is just my personal opinion, but I kind of find that focusing too much on scale, what that ends up doing to me is that I just kind of get lost, and then I'll just get too caught up on trying to make everything perfect to scale that it just takes 5 times longer to put together my maps. Now, things are different for me because I generally make a lot of maps in a week. Like I'll make maybe one a day or sometimes two a day, or maybe one in every 2 days. And so my method is a bit quicker. But I also realize as a DM just the amount of time that you have, which is not much. Okay, so it's always helpful to break rules just a little bit. Okay, let's go ahead and add in one more river. I think right here should be good. We'll have it travel along through here and then make its way up through here. Let's take a step back and just see where we're at. Oh, I did miss one more continent right here. Let's go ahead and do this one. We'll go ahead and add a nice little lake in between these mountain ranges right here. There we go. And then we'll add a couple rivers that kind of go into it. Like this. And then we'll have a couple rivers that go out. See, I'm breaking a lot of rules. I'm making a lot of unrealistic bodies of waters here. Okay, there we go. Let's go ahead and save it.